Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. To support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Quieten the hilarity, please. We just a very lively pre-session here because we have two extraordinary guests this morning, two regulars, but we had them together. That's what's extraordinary. Mick Mulroy, former Marine, former DASD for the Middle East, former senior agency operative, and the other corner wearing red, we have everyone's other favorite here, Marc P. And Marc, you know, it's such a cliche to say Marc needs little introduction, but actually he does need little introduction. Marc's a long-standing regular on the Team House and Eyes On, senior CIA officer and commentator on global affairs extraordinaire. A very level-headed approach. Gentlemen, oh, and D, of course, as always,
Hello.
the brains behind the show.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Gentlemen, much to talk about. And I'm going to stop talking right here. And let's kick off with the Marc, because you had some, let's not go right into the sex scandals. Let's talk about what's happening in, let's talk about what's happening in the Middle East.
Let me just start. I always got to say this. It's first of all, I love coming on with you all. I can't remember. I've lost count how many times I've been on this show and in the Team House. But joining me today is Mick Mulroy, who is a tremendous human being. He was a fantastic agency officer. He's a friend of mine, a great person. And I always think back to my career at CIA, where there's this kind of these type A narcissistic, sociopathic personalities. Like Mick is actually really, truly one of the nice guys. He's a good human being. And so, and I always cherish that. And Mick can tell the story more, but when Mick was running a paramilitary base in Afghanistan, I replaced him as the base chief. And I think when I came in that night, I think we were taking incoming 107 millimeter fire, and my eyes were probably bugged out. And Mick just, met me with a big smile on his face, and basically said, hey, welcome to Shkin. So I'll never forget that tremendous turnover. But I probably crapped my pants on the helo flight in, and but Mick calmed me down. And great human being, great American. So it's awesome to be on with Mick.
Amen. Same here, brother. My Greek brother. I guess I got two Greek brothers on this show now, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
All right. So as I'm done kind of telling Mick how great he is. I could spend the whole show doing that. But, the things about what happened over the last, 72 hours in Israel. I mean, I've said this on air several times on MSNBC and quoted in the press, and I'm Greek, so I am very prone to hyperbole. So let's just get this out there. So, I'm guilty in that. But, this really was an Israeli masterclass on covert action. And it was, in my mind, the most impressive kinetic covert or most kinetic intelligence operation I'd ever seen, just because of the vast scale of it and the audacity of it, with not only it being what we thought was a supply chain operation, but I think the Israelis, turns out now, were the supply chain. I don't think they intercepted real pagers. I think they created the pagers. So, pretty incredible. We could talk about the tactics of it, which will be fun. I think Mick perhaps shares my view on how impressive this was, that, but was this a strategic success? And I think that probably remains to be seen, because I think it was sending a message to Hezbollah that they don't want that they should not want a wider war, that Israel has achieved total kind of intelligence dominance over them. But, Hezbollah gets a vote. And so, as I'm sure Mick is, everyone's kind of assessing day to day Hezbollah's reaction.
Yeah, I want to get in a little bit later to Hezbollah's, kind of whether this was part of a strategic plan. But for either of you, yeah, please just let's talk about how they pulled this off. You mentioned that you think that they didn't break into the supply chain; they manufactured their own pages.
Mick, go ahead, take a crack.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Mark. I think this is very impressive. We'll get into how it was carried out and when it was carried out and whether it could be done at a different time that have been more effective. And of course, you can't go past the fact that, you know, some innocent civilians, including kids, were killed in this thing as well. So, but to start with, yeah, day by day, it seems like we learn more about this operation, which obviously is the case with a lot of covert operations when everybody wants to say something because they're successful, right? If you think back to the Bin Laden raid, I mean, almost the entirety of it came out eventually. But it does look like they actually created the company that created the pagers and actually made real pagers and had real clients who just thought they were buying pagers, right? So there's a lot of these same type out there, of course, not that were manipulated to have explosives in it. But, you know, they're talking, like ABC verified this morning that this has gone back 10, 15 years.
Wow.
Like they've been, and so, you know, all the enemies of Israel should be concerned right now because they don't know what they have that has this, you know, kind of manipulated technical capability, to be frank, because I'm sure they didn't just do it for Hezbollah. It wouldn't make sense.
I could just picture some
so-
spore schmuck like looking through like invoices to see what company sold them what, like
Oh,
in
yeah.
the last 10
Yeah,
years. Sorry,
right.
go ahead.
And, you know, it doesn't mean they wouldn't have more than one company. So there's a lot of, I see duplication coming from this. Once people see how effective it was tactically, I can see not just our adversaries, but, you know, also some of our allies looking at how, and potentially us, how this could be used. Although we can also discuss whether the U.S. would do something similar to this.
Not a chance.
Yeah, not a chance actually. And there's so much risk, right? I mean, now we've got, because, you know, with anything like this, what, 20-30% didn't go off, right? So now they're just floating around out there, right? They could end up on a plane, they could end up on a, you know, who knows? It could end up exploding without, you know, the trigger. I mean, there's so many legal issues in this. You're right. I agree with you, Mark. There's no way I think we've done that. But, you know, I think my speculation, not that I have any information on this was done for a purpose. And the best purpose that I could see is if there is a ground war between Israel and Hezbollah, and you can see the Wall Street Journal reporting, which citing several people that indicates that that's where we're heading from this, the report from this morning. I think they would use it right as it began, right? So that's when all these operatives are going to be away from their families, right? They're going to be in their positions to try to repel the invasion. They're going to try to switch off of cell phones, of course. And then handheld radios and beepers and stuff like that would have been their primary communications. You cross the line of departure, you trigger everything. You've taken 3,000, terrorists off the battlefield, and they can't communicate, right? That's what. So I think, you know, and I've heard rumors to this effect that the Israelis thought they had been compromised, that somebody in the Hezbollah, you know, counterintelligence apparatus had figured this out, and so it was either utilize it now or, you know, you just saw 3,000 pagers get thrown in the ocean, right? So I don't know if that's true, so I'm not saying it's but, you know, my speculation, and some people have backed me up from comments they've got from officials, that might have been the case. So that could have been the strategic, you know, high level operational impact that they intended, and they just had to do it prematurely because of the potential was compromised.
Yeah, so ideally, yeah, it would be right before the invasion, right? In the same way, before launching or before supporting an ISAF or Peshmerga attack on the Islamic State. You know, we would go after their. I mean, we would have broken into their signals system already, but it didn't become. You know, we didn't go full court press on that until right before an attack to disable leadership. And so this, yeah, I think the effect would be 72 hours or two afterwards. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think that analysis is correct. So then you get to the point where if this is true, if the Israelis thought there was a compromise, and you actually saw that the Israeli security cabinet huddling prior to this, you know, there was all these rumors that Galant, the defense minister, was going to be fired, and that kind of went away. And all of a sudden, the Israelis went into this kind of closed session, and I think there are a lot of people are wondering what's going on. Well, what I think the discussion was is, okay, so, it's this notion, of use it or lose it. What do we do with this capability now? This is a tool. So when the intelligence community goes to the policymakers, this is a tool. Originally, this tool was designed for, operational prep in the environment right before an invasion, knock out their whole command infrastructure, cause fear. The Israelis rolled in. Well, that's not what happened. And so I think my sense is that the Israelis said, okay, should we actually still use this? And because some of this stuff that I've been hearing is the answer was yes, we should, because again, it's almost part of their strategy of escalating to de-escalate. That's been Israeli military doctrine for a long time. So they climb the escalatory ladder. So the theory would be, okay, we're gonna launch this kinetic intelligence operation, which is of course a 2-day operation, followed up by strikes, which we saw yesterday in southern Lebanon. Again, that's the message to Nasrallah. So I think that there's a saying we used to have, when we kind of ran things on this on a much smaller scale, but it's the bird in hand. Like, do we go ahead and do this? So I think that's probably where the thinking went. And you even saw yesterday when the Israelis, jets were breaking the sound barrier over Beirut as Nasrallah was giving his speech. So originally this op was probably designed for an actual Israeli kind of rolling into Lebanon, but I think that the policymakers then, with a possible compromise, said, okay, we're going to use it for a little bit of a different effect. The big question, of course, is how will Hezbollah respond? And Nasrallah in his speech was pretty defiant, but that doesn't matter. The big question is, will this lead to a kind of a wider war? Because if you do the kind of the escalate to de-escalate strategy, it doesn't work if the other side escalates further. So as you keep climbing that ladder, I'm getting to all this like academic think tanky stuff. I probably read too much of this, but I think that's what's going on now.
So you think Nasrallah is his rhetoric is always fairly aggressive, but he's also known as being a pragmatist, and it'll be interesting. Do you think?
Right, the Israelis could level Beirut in about a second. So they have not. So of course Hezbollah has this tremendous arsenal of missiles that could target Israeli population centers, but the Israeli Air Force could cause enormous destruction to Beirut. And so does Iran want to see their proxy destroyed? Does Hezbollah, which is an integral part of the Lebanese political system, want to see that go away as well? And so if you look at neither side, this doesn't make sense for either side for an all-out war. What the Israelis want is for Hezbollah to stand down, pull back behind the the Litani River, and have 70,000 of their citizens go back in the north. I mean, that's the the war aim of the cabinet. Israel's war goal is not to destroy Hezbollah as a fighting force; it's to actually allow their people to go back. So I think for all sides it would make sense to stand down, but that the enemy gets a vote. We got to see what Hezbollah does.
Yeah, and if I could just foot stomp that, I mean, I just got back from Israel, doing the humanitarian stuff we do out there. But I talked to the people I know from top to bottom, from the from generals down to the reservist that's a bartender between deployments in Gaza. Right? Everybody says, bottom line is, we're gonna get our people back into their homes. The 70,000 that are populating hotels right in Tel Aviv, and they don't believe that they're going to voluntarily go back to the Litani River, which is required by the UN resolution on it, 1701. And so they're just when you talk to them, it isn't if it's going to happen, it's when, from top to bottom. So I don't know if that's just a psychological effort on their part, or it's just they just think there's zero chance that Hezbollah can politically voluntarily just pick up shop and move 18 miles. I don't know the exact term, and just basically as a complete concession to Israel without being forced to. So I mean, think of a scenario where that would happen. So if they won't do it, and if we agree that they won't do it, then what's going to make them? And it isn't going to be air. It's going to have to include a ground component. I think. So that's why the inevitability when you talk to people on the ground is clear from the Israeli perspective that this is going to happen.
And from a pragmatic perspective, it's problematic, of course, because the the IDF is still recoiling from Gaza, right? I mean, in order to prepare for Lebanon, we haven't seen the big troop movements yet that would indicate imminent invasion of Lebanon. But at the same time, the Israelis are probably grappling with reconstitution. They've had extended activation of the reserves, which has had an effect on the economy. So, the downside looking ahead is severe disruption to their own economy and indeed their own social fabric if they do go ahead and launch an invasion of Lebanon.
Yes, and
I mean,
on that note,
yeah, go ahead,
Andy,
go ahead, man.
one real quick point is I said the same thing to a former IDF person I was talking to about something else, and he said, we could see a traditional large-scale troop movement up to the north, divisions, mechanized divisions, etc. Or you could see, which we already did see, a lot of paratrooper elements moving out of Gaza in other positions, special operations, so that it's more of a, to the extent you can, do a surprise type operation that then's followed out by massive troop movements, right? So that it will come really quickly and maybe unexpectedly, where some ground is taken early on, some troops are cut off from their supporting elements, and then the large scale conventional forces start moving. Because think of the distances we're talking. This is Israel. This is not that great. I don't think he was saying it's something he knew was in the planning, or I probably wouldn't tell a podcast. But this was his speculation based on, and he was a former, Israeli special operations officer. But so that could be the case too. We might not see the big movement. I might see a quick push, airborne air assault type thing, and then all of the mobilization come quickly thereafter. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, I think that's in terms of, if you see there's been kind of repeated references in the press to the IDF Northern Command is providing these kind of war plans for the security cabinet. So I think that's 100% right, but it's not inevitable. So again, that's part of the kind of the so if Hezbollah, and that's a giant if they stood down, if there's more diplomacy, these things don't have to occur. And again, that's Israel climbing the escalatory ladder. So I agree with that. Talking to Israelis, I mean or understanding kind of conventional Israeli doctrine. I mean, they fought a war for a year. This is going way beyond what Israel and the IDF is built for very quick, short campaigns. So, you can make an argument, or you can question, is the IDF actually exhausted right now? Do they need kind of time to rest and recuperate? Because I think Hezbollah, and in Lebanon, it's a different arena. That's the existential threat for Israel. Gaza's not. Hamas was not. It was heinous what happened on October 7th. But this is a kind of a different ballgame. So, one can question, and I think many Israelis probably are, is that, is the IDF actually ready for this? Is this the ideal time? I was talking to a former Israeli intel Mossad official, and that was his argument. He said war is inevitable, but he questioned, are we ready? And I think that's kind of a fair point too. And I think Mick alluded to it. Like the Israeli economy suffers if you call up 1 or 200,000 of the reserves, and I would imagine they would have to here. But we haven't seen that yet. So again, I think that's why these campaign plans are probably in play. They're on the table. They can be initiated, but that's not inevitable. And I think that's probably smart of the Israelis to just kind of keep slowly climbing that ladder. And I just there's something coming across the wire right now is that the Israelis just whacked another senior Hezbollah guy in Beirut. So that probably goes along with that kind of strategy of making this really painful before a decision is made to launch. One last point too. I mean, we're talking Lebanon is a quagmire for the Israelis. I was in Damascus in 2006 along the border in Syria, and the kind of the result of that, Beirut suffered a lot of destruction. A lot of people were killed. This was not a kind of a high point for the IDF. 2006 was not considered successful. And I think probably many Israelis don't remember, but their occupation in southern Lebanon as well was extremely controversial. So you do have to wonder if they're going to bite off more than they can chew. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. It's not inevitable. I don't think Hezbollah wants it, and I think the IDF is stretched thin, and I think that's part of the reason that there's so much friction between Minister Galant and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I don't think it's inevitable. I think they want us to think that they think it's inevitable, because then it puts so much pressure on us, Amos Hochstein, who's the primary apparently on this, to get the Hezbollah to withdraw, right?
Right.
Because they don't want to think, they want us to think that they're headed toward this regardless, and that we have to be the ones to derail the conflict. But they are extended. Everybody you talk to over there realizes the IDF is not only fighting, that would be a second front, and it's a front that they weren't as successful as they'd like in 2006.
One thing, Andy, can I raise this a topic that I think it'll be kind of interesting, fun to discuss, and that's the idea of kind of the deterrent factor, or the fear factor that Israel once had, but then lost on October 7th. And I think it's an important subject. And Mick is I haven't been in Israel for a while, but Mick was just there, and so I think that he probably felt that as well. October 7th kind of shattered that myth of the the invincible Mossad, the invincible Shin Bet, the IDF that was kind of the standing on the ramparts for the country. So not only was the Israeli intelligence community reeling, but the Israeli population was like, hold on a second. These institutions that are kind of the bedrock of our nation has been shown to be less than ideal. I mean, that the intelligence failures of October 7th were catastrophic. But look what's happened since then. You have Mossad conducting the operation that killed Fuad Shukr in Beirut back in July. Every American, I think, and I'm sure this crew here would celebrate this. Sorry, you just should, because he was Shukr was one of the planners for the bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Lebanon, killed 241 American personnel. And so they conducted the Shukr op. Then they gathered intelligence, which then allowed the IDF, the Israeli Air Force, to preempt Hezbollah retaliation. And then they conduct this kind of incredible 48-hour campaign of the exploding pagers and the radios for emergency comms. And so you can make an argument that the Israeli intelligence services, along with the IDF, are kind of restoring the fear that they put in their adversaries. That's important.
The assassination on Hania too,
and the assassination in Hania in Iran, absolutely. And so so when they're back, they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. They got their mojo back a bit, but that's important also for the psyche of the Israeli population, I think. Mick, I'm curious if you kind of felt that when you were there, because I mean, again, that these are institutions which are obviously there's conscription in Israel, but are seen very favorably by the Israeli public.
Oh yes, absolutely. I concur. And you'd really have to, and I don't have enough information to make the full assessment, is how much of this was October 7th intelligence failure, how much was a leadership failure, right? I mean, how much did they know and disregard? How much did they just assume that this was all for show, that they're literally, training right next to, Israel and Gaza on, these type of operations that essentially exactly what they did, right? I mean, if you look back and do the forensic, you didn't have to be a top-notch spy agency to know what they at least wanted you to think they were trying to prepare for. So, and then was it disregarded? But I do think that because it's viewed as at least somewhat of an intelligence failure, they've been super aggressive to try to prove, the capabilities that we all know they have, and they really have. I mean, if you look at the details of the Hania assassination in Tehran, it's like textbook. It's like something that would happen in a movie, and you wouldn't believe it'd be true, right? A bomb under the bed of the place. I mean, I don't even think they killed the bodyguard. It was in the room or the room adjacent. Right. It's just him. I mean, it's really impressive. And obviously this, whether we would have done it or not, this was a highly effective operation when it came to these pagers and push-to-talk. So I think they're doing what they do best. And they have confidence. I mean, let's face it, they're offering Sinwar, free passage out of there. So they get a ceasefire, right? At least that's what's being reported. Why? Because they have a lot of confidence in Mossad, right? They're like, hey, man, we'll let you go, but we're going to catch you down the road. And I think probably one of the reasons, although I think he's such a psychopath, he wouldn't take it even if he thought he could get away. He realizes, he being Sinwar, that he's going to get smoked, whether it's in Gaza or wherever he goes. So I do think they've reined in their footing, and I think they're going to be less restricted when it comes to, like 1972, right? The Operation Wrath of God after the Munich Olympics. I think we're seeing that now, and there's going to be probably things that don't make the press that they're doing in more sensitive areas, and I think they're showing that they're very capable.
Isn't there something to be said though that like maybe that was the play after October 7th rather than going into Gaza and smoking 40,000 people? Sorry, I'm that's my dumb question.
That they could have done that instead of the military occupation?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there was any scenario where the Israelis wouldn't have gone in militarily to Gaza after October 7th. They have, I mean, military objectives, destruction of the tunnels, the destruction of their actual military capability. I think they had like 30 battalions worth of terrorists. And then, of course, the leadership, which by all accounts, from my understanding, is still primarily in Gaza, right? I mean, so the only way to get there is this. There's different estimations on where they are on those objectives. I heard around 12 battalions degraded to a point of complete incapable of conducting military operations, but that leaves a lot. So we might be seeing a lot more of this conflict there. I don't know if that's accurate. The Israeli count is much higher. I think it's 20 plus. But I've just seen independent analysis, and I don't know where they're getting it from. But either way, they're not done with the destruction of the battalions, with the destruction of the tunnels, and obviously Sinwar still running around somewhere or hiding in a bunker or in a tunnel.
Can we talk about how they pulled this off with the pages? Because there's been a lot of speculation. I know the British papers were talking about like 10 grams of explosive, but others are talking about it being just a direct cyber attack on the lithium battery. Hard to tell for us, right? Because we've only seen videos of the scale of damage and we haven't seen the wreckage. But what are your thoughts?
I don't think. I mean, look, this is the 1996. The Israelis killed Yahya Ayash, who was a master Hamas bomb maker, using an exploding cell phone, and command detonated it as well. So this, they've undertaken kinetic operations, command detonating stuff. They killed him at Mughniya in Damascus in 07. Again, command detonated an explosive in the tire of a Mitsubishi Pajero outside of Hezbollah safe house. So the technology of that to me is not all that new, and impressive is the wrong word, but the idea of putting explosives in a device and then being able to remotely detonate it. I think that, for everyone I talk to who knows a lot more than me, the idea of heating up a lithium battery, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. So it looks like the Israelis did get a hold of these devices. Again, we talked about before. Was it, did they actually get actual pagers and then modify them, or were they the supply chain themselves? I got to be careful on how I say this. I have met some of the senior Israeli bomb makers. They have them. It was a strange meeting, but they're really good, and they've been good for a very long time because they do this. So I think the speculation on that, I think it's more interesting to think about how they put together, as Mick said before, these kind of front companies in Europe. And so the Taiwan-based company with a subsidiary in Hungary, but it looks like the Mossad front was in Bulgaria. I had a journalist on the phone with me who were actually in Sofia looking for this front company. Of course, it's gone. It's a building with no face on it, and the person who was there, I think it was like someone with a Norwegian passport, who shockingly is no longer in country. I mean, this is Mossad's use of elite, what we call non-official covert officers, what the Russians call illegal. So the way they run their clandestine operations, the Mossad will have a declared station chief in an embassy, but most of their clandestine operations are run by Knox. And so this is what they did. They were very patient in setting up these front companies, and you know, we kind of alluded to it before. So the U.S. intelligence community has no patience to do that. You know, where's the return on investment? You know, what are the metrics on this? I mean, for 10, 15 years to put something like this together, you know, that's just something we unfortunately don't do. And then kind of again the second part of that is just, you know, someone in the, you know, in the Israeli national security infrastructure, the decision making again is much different than ours. They have a different view of civilian casualty. I've talked about this forever. It's not condemning them nor condoning them, but we would never get an operation approved like this because you don't know, you know, the effects, and there's going to be civcas. And so, I mean, it is beyond even comprehension that the U.S. would have approved an operation like this on, you know, especially on the scale, because, you know, you just don't know, and you don't have control. When we conduct these kinetic operations, there's almost, you know, a visual, there's an ISR, there's a targeting aspect of it that you actually have to have so many safeguards that you're killing the right person. In this case, Mossad and the Israelis would not have had that. But, you know, the forensics of this are going to be fun. I mean, you know, Mick and I will probably geek out on this. Like, you know, we will look very closely on how they pulled this off, because what was the tradecraft involved in setting up the front companies? What was the travel of the Mossad Knox? You know, where did they actually modify the pagers or create the pagers? Where did they build them? How did they get them into, you know, eventually into Lebanon? I mean, so the reports yesterday were all these, you know, all these companies. By the way, it's not great for a brand if your pager, your walkie-talkie is blowing up everywhere. But they're saying, hey, there's no trace of any kind of custom shipments anywhere. How'd the Israelis get them in? A lot of this stuff is going to be, at least, you know, in my kind of weird, twisted mind, fun to, you know, go through the forensics of it.
Yeah, and I was
Did the
talking
US,
to one.
sorry, go.
So just, it was a comment on Mark's comment. I was talking to one Israeli who says was kind of surprised at just how much lawyers are involved in our operational decision process, right? He goes, you know, our lawyers basically help us write our wills and powers of attorney, and then, you know, we don't see them again, right? So, I mean, I'm not advocating for that. You know, we have a system of checks and balances and oversight, which I think is absolutely essential to our system. But for them, they don't view legal reviews in the same light. I do think if they were going to go to this effort, which is a lesson learned, I would agree to the U.S. intelligence that we should have long term, because you never know what capability you need, and if you didn't build it, you don't have it. But I think if they're going to go to that effort, they would have inserted some kind of explosives to increase, you know, the impact of the detonation. You know, they had the opportunity, so I think they would, because they did want these guys to be dead if they had a chance, or certainly injured to a point of being knocked out of the fight entirely. So I think they likely did that, and I hope they're sharing all the information with us, or as much as we can, because we do need to figure out, from our perspective, our covert capabilities, how we can do operations that involve this level of sophistication. I agree, we wouldn't have done this, but there's other applications of getting in the supply chain, or actually creating the supply chain to this level when it comes to clandestine operations. We should always be willing to learn from other people.
Sure, and one other point to add on this is that, you know, so this is going to sound complicated, but, you know, is this a cyber operation or is it a kinetic operation? Well, no, it's a human-enabled supply chain operation with a cyber component and a kinetic finish. I mean, that's mind-blowing, putting all this together. So if you think, you know, I mean, I can't imagine that the Israelis didn't have a tremendous agent network inside Hezbollah for this, for so many different reasons. But think about even Hezbollah's move from cell phones to pagers. You know, you can see a scenario in which Israeli penetrations would actually have encouraged that. Think of Hezbollah's, you know, then of course the procurement officials choosing a certain company again. So, and this is why, and one point to raise, and this is part of Israeli planning as well, and they should amplify this, but there's going to be a brutal counterintelligence review inside Hezbollah. They're going to tear themselves apart with a witch hunt, and this is great. This is exactly what, you know, we all kind of collectively would want, because what does it do? You know, so their communications, their command and control is all incapacitated. They have 3,000 personnel maimed or injured, you know, taken off the battlefield, and now there's going to be a counterintelligence witch hunt. I mean, this is fantastic. from the Israelis' point of view, again, to completely throw Hezbollah off its game. But that CI aspect of it, I think, is going to be really interesting to see. And you already see some media reporting on that. There's going to be quite the investigation inside, and that gives more opportunities for almost covert influence themes from the Israelis. You know, you want to stir the pot on this. You want this to actually happen.
Did the US know about this beforehand?
I don't think so.
In my experience, mostly at the Pentagon, the Israelis generally inform us of significant operations where it could impact, forces that we have in the region. But it's usually last minute, right? And if it's a really intel heavy driven operations, there's no details, right? So I don't disbelieve the White House's statement that they basically told some big operation is going to happen in Hezbollah in 42 minutes, right? I've been in that situation, and it's always on Friday night and you're trying to get home and then you got to turn around and, in my case, go tell the secretary's office. But I think that's, and I don't think we'd be involved in the actual operation because it's contrary to U.S. legal and policy, right? The U.S. wants to see a reduction in tensions in the region. They want to see a ceasefire agreement, which is obviously not going to help. So it's contrary to U.S. policy on the subject. So I don't know, but I don't think we would have been involved for those two reasons. And I do think they would have informed us, but probably at the last minute, so that they could technically say that we knew, and that we could prepare for any kind of retaliation that might.
So two things on that. One is, they don't need us. In my time working with Mossad, if they need us, they'll ask. And when they don't need us, they won't ask, number one. And number two is, we'd object to this. Mick's 100% right. Like, there's no way the Israelis would want to give us any opportunity to A, say no, and second, to leak it. Because in some ways, this does go against kind of U.S. policy of trying to de-escalate. I've had so many instances of, Israelis kind of wink and nod to me when they've done something after the fact. I was actually in Israel when in 2007, when, just on a separate matter, when the Israelis bombed El Kabar, which is the North Korean built nuclear reactor in northern Syria, which was subject of enormous back and forth with the U.S. government, and Condoleezza Rice, and George W. Bush did not want the Israelis to take it out. And then I walked into the embassy that day, and I remember seeing the station chief, and he said, "There's a big smoking hole in the desert," and I laughed. And then I went to see Mossad afterwards, and they were smiling. So sometimes they don't tell us when they think it's in their interest, or more so when we think they think we're going to object. And U.S. officials understand that. There's also a part of it too, is that there's a worry constantly that we're so tied into Israeli actions, is that the retaliation might come against the United States. So I find it sometimes annoying when we have these public statements saying we didn't know, because Hezbollah is a terrorist group. But there's a reason for that, because the fear is, if Hezbollah kind of retaliates in other manners, which would be kind of asymmetric warfare, terrorist attacks against soft targets, against Israeli embassies, etc., that if the U.S. is seen as being part of this operation, that we would then end up being a target. And so I think there's kind of a combination of those factors. But yeah, it's always fun when you get a wink and a nod, and the Israelis will eventually tell us. I think in this case they said that Galant called Secretary of Defense Austin, said we're going to do something.
yeah.
Okay. Somewhere.
Which is like saying nothing, right? Something's going to blow up over there at any given time, right?
Yeah, no
So,
shit.
yeah.
Thanks, bro. Yeah.
So, what lies ahead? If you were a betting man, which I know in many ways you are.
Unfortunately, I think the ceasefire negotiations have taken such a turn that no matter what we say optimistically, that nobody believes us anymore, right? The U.S. has been like, we're right there. It's going to happen tomorrow and all that. And I know they were trying to use that as leverage to push Israel. So I'm not being too critical, but if you talk to people in the region, they don't even listen to our characterization of where the negotiations are anymore. Although I do have to say the level of effort has been incredible. From not just the State Department, as you expect, but in Mark's former organization. But I just don't think, unfortunately, for the hostages that are there, that they're really going anywhere. Netanyahu doesn't seem to want a ceasefire, period, for both his objectives and his future. And Hamas won't take one unless it's a permanent ceasefire, because they don't see the purpose of incrementally, handing back hostages. Right? If the war's just going to start again. So that's super unfortunate for those hostages. However, if this war in the north kicks off, people are unfortunately going to even stop talking about Gaza. This is going to be so catastrophic that the entire focus of the world, which does matter, is going to be on trying to stop that from just spiraling out of control. It's going to be bad enough if it's just between Hezbollah and Israel, but if Iran thinks, to Mark's earlier point, that their proxy force is about to get eradicated, what are they going to do? Are they going to step in and try to make this a regional conflict of which they're fully involved? And if that's the case, it's not good for anybody. And then will Israel just take that as, okay, you're in, so we're going to do everything we can to mitigate your capabilities, to include any kind of nuclear ambition you have, which would just escalate it even further. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think everybody should want to see it turn around and go the other way. But that's my 2 cents on where we stand right now, and where I think the U.S. thinks we could go if something isn't changed in the trajectory.
I think I go back and forth on this. So the hard time I have on this is that Hezbollah is an organization that has killed a hell of a lot of Americans, and this goes back to 1983, 1984. Don't forget they captured and tortured and murdered our station chief, and they were involved in even Iran's proxy wars in Iraq, let alone the Marine Corps barracks bombing and the bombing at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. There's a lot of blood on their hands. Many CIA officers over the years have worked as much on against Hezbollah, as they have against Al Qaeda. And so I have a hard time being agnostic, because I'm going to read a quote I gave I shouldn't have done this. My wife was pissed, to Tom Rogan in the Washington Examiner. He published it. And he said, listing Hezbollah's attacks on Americans, Polymeropoulos added, "So watching their nuts get blown off, I'm enjoying this, all of it." And my wife is like, "Are you out of your mind? Like, you sound like, can you please be?" As I'm looking at Mick in a suit right now, and I'm on Red Sox t-shirt, she's like, "Can you please be a little more professional?" I got messages from people all over the world saying, "I cannot believe you said that in a public forum." But Dee knows me. That's
everybody's thinking it. That's for sure. So God bless you for saying it.
On the one side of me, a fight against a terrorist group is a fight always worth having. I mean, I do believe that, in violence of action in this. That said, putting your kind of analyst hat on, U.S. policymaker hat on, there is a lot that can go, way wrong in terms of a huge flare-up, including the U.S. getting involved. And so I think that, ultimately, if, what happens, I go back to the old kind of saying you have as an intelligence officer, where it depends. Like, it's okay to say I don't know, because there's so many different factors. But I think that we have to be careful. I saw Matt Miller, the State Department spokesman, yesterday, being almost critical of Israeli actions about the pager. We got to remember Hezbollah is a terrorist group, and I know it's part of the political fabric of Lebanon, but even when we act as an intermediary in terms of the negotiations with Israel and Hamas in Gaza, Hamas is a terrorist group that killed 43 Americans. So I struggle to kind of put my adult hat on and my old kind of, CIA officer hat on when, a lot of work was done to really disrupt the terror and sometimes, remove from the battlefield these individuals and terrorist groups. A long way of saying is I don't know. I'm not sure. So many different things depend on, and again, I just, as something's coming across, I think the Israelis just whacked a very senior Hezbollah guy in Beirut. And so the question is, are they now, are they now provoking Hezbollah to the point, humiliating them so much that on the one hand, is Hezbollah going to stand down, or is Nasrallah and Iran going to say just, hey, fuck it, it's game on? I don't know.
And one quick point on that, because Mark brought up a really good point, I think, because so many Americans seem to think that we should be some kind of mediator in this whole event, right? Like we're not involved, like we didn't lose 40 Americans on October 7th. Like they still don't have. I mean, we're not a disinterested party. We're party. We're a party to this, right? Hezbollah. I mean, I heard the stats. I don't know if it's correct, but it killed more Americans than any other terrorist group except for Al Qaeda.
That's right.
So these guys, they need to get this right. And in many ways, not in this operation, but the U.S. should be 100% behind them when it comes to fighting these assholes, to be frank. So, I mean, we have to view ourselves not just as a part of the negotiator. I mean, that's fine, and a ceasefire, but we're not Switzerland on this, right? And we shouldn't view ourselves that way. And
I'm bringing out the old Mick here. This is good.
Yeah, right.
This is the Mick that I know.
People can be critical of us and how we conducted our operations in the GWAT, right? But for a lot of us, we remember we were like, we had a different view. We weren't so analytical
right.
because we shouldn't have been. They attacked us, they killed our people, and our job isn't to just sit there and wring our hands. Our job is to track them down. So
one of the things that Mick that I saw was, so in the react. So look, so people are very upset about the 40,000 or whatever the number of casualties in Gaza, but the same people are criticizing Israel for a targeted campaign that clearly was much more in line with LOAC in terms of the pagers and the walkie-talkies. You're never going to win.
What's LOAC, Mark?
It's law of armed conflict.
Okay.
So reducing civilian casualties, ensuring.
Well, listen, I'm one of the guys, people that are like, maybe 40,000 people didn't have to get smoked in Gaza, but I'm also cool with like smoking the actual bad guys using intelligence and doing it the right way, kind of strategically, rather than.
But a lot of people are not. A lot of people from the left now are screaming at the Israelis, and the UN as well. I mean, Mick can't say anything because he works with the UN now, but the UN has come out, condemned the Israeli. This is fun. The UN has come out and condemned the Israelis for the pager op and the walkie-talkie op. So we're never going to satisfy, in the counterterrorism world, you're never going to satisfy a kind of big chunk of critics. And I think you just have to go forward anyway. Mick, you don't have to comment on the UN.
Well, I can't comment on this. I mean, from the Israeli perspective, this was like the largest scale, almost simultaneous attack on a fighting force, a terrorist type force, that had such low collateral damage.
Right.
You can spin this whole thing on its head. I mean, and the UN condemns Israel for everything. Every day, Hezbollah launches, rockets and missiles directly at civilian populations.
Right.
That's terrorist activity. When you directly target civilians, that's terror. When you directly target a combatant, that's not. Now you still have the proportionality issue, and I'm not excusing anybody, including ourselves, and not doing that. But from the Israeli perspective, they're like, this is the lowest civilian casualties to target 3,000, individuals that are spread out, right, across the spectrum. So there's a couple different ways to look at this, and I don't know that Israel could have done something like this in a way that had fewer civilian casualties. Always bad, including when we do it. But it's part of warfare, unfortunately.
Well, fellas, as we get into kind of the home stretch, what haven't we talked about?
Is Galant going to get fired?
We solved the problems of the Middle East.
Is Galant going to get fired? That's my question.
Looks like that talk has died down now. I mean, removing a defense minister at a time of a possible, massive regional war would be ridiculous. I geek out on Israeli politics, and this is going to sound weird. This is from Netanyahu's wife who was pushing this. And so, it's ultimately, I think that there is a huge part of Netanyahu's actions that are always can be attributed to his desire to remain in power, not potentially go to jail. But I think that's probably that's probably off the table now. And there's some question even in the Israeli press if this was just kind of a trial balloon thrown out there. I mean, the one individual the United States government trusts, well, certainly would be David Barnea, the Mossad chief, but Galant is very popular in U.S. circles. Mick could talk about that further, perhaps. But I think if you care about the U.S.-Israeli strategic relationship, and Netanyahu does, even though he's can be an asshole sometimes, I think removing Galant at this point would be disastrous. But again, Bibi will do things unconventional sometimes, so we'll see.
I agree. I think it was a trial balloon, and it got popped like almost immediately, right? So the Israeli population, I think they have confidence in a lot of these leaders that have the experience. And Galant was, a 2-star. Galant was the head of Shaitet 13, was doing a lot of these operations, including the one that rescued the hostages recently. He has the creds, is what I'm saying, right? And most of the disagreements is completely backed up by the rank and file IDF, to include Halevi, right? So, if you fire him, it's more of a condemnation against the whole Israeli national security apparatus. It's not just Galant.
Yeah.
So it would really, send shockwaves.
He's been fired once already.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and
right.
And there was a kind of a IDF-wide outcry, especially among the reservists, in support of him. He knows he has a strong power base, and he knows he has the ear of the Secretary of Defense and also the president, more so perhaps than Netanyahu, which, in other words, you notice that a lot of the interaction takes place between Austin and Galant rather than Biden and Netanyahu. A lot of below the surface. So if Galant goes, Netanyahu realizes he loses that last kind of strong link, even though it undermines him.
Mick raised a really interesting point, is that the Israeli national security establishment, the IDF, Mossad, and Shin Bet, the chiefs, all of them were actually really pushed for the ceasefire deal. Now there is, it's clear that there's issues with Hamas. Yahya Sinwar, may be a huge obstacle to this as well. But there's no question Netanyahu was too, in fighting for his political survival, worrying that his government would fall if he agreed to anything because of the kind of crazies on the right. But the one of the really interesting storylines, I think, in Israel is the tension between the prime minister and the entire Israeli national security apparatus. Everybody. What I think what has changed, and that had to do with Gaza and the hostages and the ceasefire deal, where that changes a little bit now, I think, is in Lebanon. I'm sorry, is kind of the pending battle with Hezbollah, because of just the kind of complete political outcry that the 70,000 Israelis can't return to their homes. So in some sense, maybe that tension will dissipate a little bit. I think it of course depends on what happens. But I think you have seen, the Israelis I talked to, there's very divided views on what to do about Gaza and the hostages. For the hostages, and Mick certainly knows this. Israeli doctrine is you get everyone home. Period. You trade 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for one Israeli hostage, and that's actually almost written in Israeli national security doctrine. So there's a lot of people very upset that the hostages are not out. When it comes to Lebanon, though, in the north, I don't know. I think there's probably some more, not unanimity, but the majority of the Israeli public probably supports a very strong line. So you might see that tension between the defense establishment, intelligence establishment, and Netanyahu dissipate a little bit, at least right now.
Boys, anything else?
No, man, it's great talking to you guys. That was a great chat.
Andy, what do you
We
got?
should do this as a quad more often.
No, that's
I'd love to do it.
Absolutely, it's been awesome having both of you guys on. Do the final rundown then.
Everybody, make sure to check out Mick. He's the Lobo Institute. All the links will be in the description. Mark, of course, he's gonna be on the Team House Network soon. I could feel it. But check out his podcast, Above Average Intelligence, is on Deep State Radio. Andy Milburn, All his links are in the description. His book is incredible. Watch it. Watch Andy. He was just on Cleared Hot with Andy Stumpf. Great podcast. All the links will be in the description. And the best way you can help the show is patreon.com/theteamhouse. Please and thank you.
Thanks, guys.